Hey there, focused learners, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on a deeply data-driven journey straight into the complex machinery of India's 2025 trade dynamics. Now, if you follow global economics, you already know India is an absolute powerhouse. But the real story? It's not just about how much they're trading, it's about what they're trading, who they're dealing with, and exactly where those financial scales are tipping. We're going to dive right into the numbers, pulling straight from the 2025 India Trade Intelligence Dashboard, so we can really understand the forces shaping one of the world's most crucial economies. Let's get right into it. Here's a quick look at our agenda. First, the global trade picture. Then, we'll peek inside India's imports, followed by their top export destinations. After that, we'll look at the specific commodities driving all this trade, and finally, a country deep dive into the UAE. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the global trade picture, looking at the macro view. All right, take a look at this massive number right here, nearly 995 billion US dollars. Simply put, we are looking at a year-to-date total trade value of practically $1 trillion. I mean, that is a staggering volume of goods flowing in and out of the country across 225 active trade partners. But, within this massive trillion-dollar footprint, there's a very specific structural reality we need to look at. And that reality brings us to the central mystery of today's explainer. Despite this booming economic profile, the overall trade balance sits at a jaw-dropping negative 255 billion US dollars. That is $250 billion in trade deficit. So if the total engine is producing nearly $1 trillion in movement, why on earth is the deficit so high? Well, let's figure it out. Diving right into the trade intelligence data, the overarching picture starts to become a lot clearer. Total exports sit at roughly $370 billion, but that's completely dwarfed by a total import value of over $625 billion. Also, notice up in the top right, there's a slight 8.8% month-over-month dip. And if you visually track the monthly trends, you'll see the orange line, which represents imports, consistently riding significantly higher than the blue line for exports all year long. Section 2. Inside India's imports, focusing on the heavy outgoings. Let's transition to the weight side of the balance sheet. Zeroing in on the import side of the equation, that massive $625 billion bill is spread across 211 partners, but actually the data reveals a heavy concentration. India isn't just buying from everywhere equally. No, a massive, massive chunk of this outflow is going to a very select, highly concentrated group of countries. Breaking down that heavy concentration, the undisputed leader here is China, accounting for an enormous $124 billion. I mean, that is more than double the next highest partner, the Russian Federation, which is sitting at roughly $53 billion, and then followed closely by the UAE at $49 billion. To really put China's dominance into perspective, by October, imports from China alone hit almost $14 billion in a single month. This incredible volume of purchasing power, directed at just a few key partners, is literally the primary anchor of that national deficit. Section 3, India's top export destinations. Let's look for the counterweight that balances these scales. Now, here is a fascinating strategic contrast. India's biggest supplier is China, right? Sending in nearly $124 billion worth of goods. But India's biggest customer? That's the USA, buying $79 billion worth of exports. So India is not primarily selling to the same partners it heavily buys from. The USA is serving as this massive export hub, pulling in goods and providing the essential revenue that keeps the whole global trade engine running. Zooming out to the continental view, we see a remarkably well-diversified portfolio. The broader Asian continent leads the pack, taking in about 39% of India's exports. The Americas, driven largely by that massive U.S. relationship we just talked about, account for roughly 27%. Europe takes about 21%, and Africa makes up roughly 10%. These geographical hubs are the vital armories keeping the export side of the balance sheet healthy, even if it doesn't entirely offset that massive import weight. Section 4, the commodities driving trade. Now, let's look under the hood at the commodity analysis dashboard. This tracks 1,220 active commodities. We're no longer looking at entire nations, we're looking at specific cargo. From agricultural products to advanced electronics, these 1,220 items are what actually make up that nearly $1 trillion number we talked about at the very beginning. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the tale of two specific commodities that emerges from the data. HS code 2710, representing refined petroleum oils, shows a massive export value of over $48 billion against imports of just $8.5 billion. Then check out HS code 8517, which covers telephone sets and smartphones. India is exporting over $27 billion worth of these devices, while importing around $18 billion. Both of these categories are operating firmly in the green. And here is a surprising fact that I find absolutely fascinating. Despite that gloomy $250 billion national deficit we saw earlier, specific sectors, like highly refined petroleum oils, are running incredibly lucrative operations. I mean, they are generating a massive trade surplus of over $39.5 billion US dollars. It just proves that within a macro deficit, there are these highly profitable micro-engines at work, driving huge value for the economy. Section 5. Country Deep Dive into the UAE, the microcosm.
If we zoom in on the Middle East on the global map, we land straight onto the United Arab Emirates Deep Dive dashboard. The UAE is India's third largest import source and its second largest export destination. This makes it an incredibly active and crucial trade partner, acting almost like a perfect mirror for India's broader global trade patterns.
The UAE really is a perfect microcosm of India's overall balance sheet. Looking at the dynamics across 782 commodities, India is buying nearly $49 billion in total imports, but only exporting about $32 billion. So that leaves a $17 billion deficit with the UAE alone. Breaking it down, petroleum wins again. India runs a $4.4 billion surplus exporting refined oils. But the heavy purchasing of luxury goods like diamonds and heavy machinery like aircraft pulls the entire partnership into the red. The profitable micro-engines just can't outpace the heavy spending.
Which brings us to our final takeaway. Despite establishing massive export hubs in the US and Europe, and despite engineering surprisingly profitable multi-billion-dollar surpluses in refined petroleum and smartphones, India's incredibly heavy import concentration with just a few key partners keeps the national deficit wide open. The data shows a powerful, highly active machine, but definitely an unbalanced one. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. As global markets continue to fluctuate, how long can this $255 billion imbalance hold? Thank you so much for joining me on this data journey today, focused learners. Stay curious, keep looking at the numbers, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.